Minnesota. The Keddie murders are an unsolved quadruple homicide that occurred over the night of April 11th through April 12th, 1981 in Keddie, California. The victims were Sue Sharp, daughter Tina, son John, and John's friend Dana Wingate. The murders took place in house number 28 of the Keddie Resort. The bodies of Wingate, Sue, and John Sharp were found on the morning of April 12th by Sue's 14-year-old daughter Sheila, who had been sleeping at a friend's house. Sue's two younger sons, Rick and Greg, as well as their friend Justin Smart, were also in the house but were unharmed. Tina was missing from the scene. Tina remained a missing person until April of 1984, when her skull and several other bones were recovered at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in Butte County, about 62 miles from Keddie. Multiple leads and suspects were examined in the intervening years, but no charges were filed. Several new leads were announced in the 21st century, including the discovery of a hammer in a pond in 2016, and the new discovery of DNA evidence. In 1979, Sue Sharp, along with her 5 children, left her home in Connecticut after separating from her husband James. They relocated to Northern California, where Sue's brother Don lived. Upon arriving in California, she rented a small trailer formerly occupied by her brother at the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy. The following fall, she moved to house number 28 in the rural Sierra Nevada railroad town of Keddie. The house was much larger than the trailer and had become available when Plumas County Sheriff Sylvester Thomas vacated the property. She resided there with her 15-year-old son John, 14-year-old daughter Sheila, 12-year-old daughter Tina, and 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg. On April 11th, 1981, at around 11:30 a.m., Sue, Sheila, and Greg drove from the residence of their friends, the Meeks family, to retrieve Rick, who was attending baseball tryouts at Gansner Field in Quincy. They happened upon John and his friend Dana Wingate hitchhiking at the mouth of the canyon from Quincy to Keddie, and then drove them about 6 miles away to Keddie. 2 hours later, at around 3:30 p.m., John and Dana hitchhiked back to Quincy, where they may have had plans to visit friends. Around this time, the boys were seen in the city's downtown area. That same evening, Sheila had plans to spend the night with the Siebold family, who lived in adjacent cabin number 27, while Sue remained at home with Rick, Greg, and the boys' young friend Justin Smart. Sheila departed the house shortly after 8 p.m. to sleep at the Siebold's. Tina, who had been watching television at the Siebold residence, returned to cabin number 28 after asking what time it was, and it was at that time 9:30 p.m. At approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, Sheila returned to number 28 and discovered the dead house's living room. All three had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords. Tina was absent from the home while the three younger children, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were found physically unharmed in an adjacent bedroom. Upon discovering the scene, Sheila rushed back to the Siebold's house, and Jamie Siebold retrieved Rick, Greg, and Justin through the bedroom window. He later admitted to having briefly entered the home through the back door to see if anyone was still alive, potentially contaminating evidence in the process. The murders of Sue, John, and Dana were especially vicious. 2 bloodied knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene. Blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Sue was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down, and gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been secured with tape. She had been stabbed in the chest, and her throat was stabbed horizontally, the wound passing through her larynx and nicking her spine. And on the side of her head was an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB rifle. John's throat was slashed. Dana had multiple head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. John and Dana suffered blunt force trauma to their heads, caused by 1 or more hammers. Autopsies determined that Sue and John died from the knife wounds and blunt force trauma, and Dana died by asphyxiation. Sheila and the Siebold family, with whom Sheila had spent the night in the neighboring home, heard no commotion during the night. A couple living in nearby house number 16 was awakened at 1:15 a.m. by what sounded like muffled screaming. Martin Smart, a neighbor and main suspect, claimed that the claw hammer had inexplicably gone missing from his home. In addition to interviewing the Smarts, detectives interviewed numerous other locals and neighbors, several including members of the Siebold family, recalling seeing a green van parked at the Sharps' house around 9 p.m. Justin offered conflicting stories of the evening and stated that he had dreamed details of the murders. In his later account of events, told under hypnosis, he claimed to have seen Sue with 2 men. Based on Justin's descriptions, composite sketches of the 2 unknown men were produced by Harlan Embry, a man with no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching. It was never explained why, with access to the Justice Department and the FBI, top forensic artists, law enforcement chose to use an amateur who sometimes volunteered to help local police. In press releases accompanying the sketches, the suspects were described in their late 20s to early 30s. One stood between 5'11" and 6'2", with dark blonde hair, and the other man between 5'6" and 5'10", with black greased hair. Both wore gold-framed sunglasses. Rumors regarding the crimes being ritualistic or motivated by drug trafficking were dismissed by Plumas County Sheriff Tom Thomas, who stated in the week following the murders that neither drug paraphernalia nor illegal drugs were found in the home. Tina's disappearance was initially investigated by the FBI as a possible abduction, although it was reported on April 29th of 1981 that the FBI had backed off the search as the California State Department of Justice was doing an adequate job and made the FBI's presence unnecessary. A grid pattern search of the area covering a 5-mile radius around the house was conducted with police canines, but the efforts were fruitless. On April 11th of 1984, a bottle collector discovered the cranium portion of a human skull and part of a mandible at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in neighboring Butte County, roughly 5 miles from Feather Falls, California. The remains were confirmed by a forensic pathologist to be those of Tina in June of 1984. Shortly after announcing the discovery, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous call that identified the remains as belonging to Tina, but the call was not documented. A tape containing a recording of the call was found at the bottom of an evidence box at some point after 2013 by a deputy who was assigned to the case. According to a 2016 article published by the Sacramento Bee, Martin Smart had left Keddie and driven to Reno, Nevada shortly after the murders. While there, he sent a letter to his wife Marilyn, ruminating on personal struggles in their marriage, which he concluded by stating, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." In a 2016 interview, Gamberg stated that the letter was overlooked in the initial investigation and was never admitted as evidence. He later criticized the quality of the initial investigation, saying, "You could take someone just coming out of the academy and they'd have done a better job." A counselor whom Smart regularly visited also alleged that he had admitted to the murders of Sue and Tina, but claimed, "I didn't have anything to do with the boys." He allegedly told the counselor that Tina was killed to prevent her from identifying him, as she had witnessed the entire encounter. John Bobede, another suspect who was in the same neighboring cabin as Smart, allegedly had ties to organized crime in Chicago. He died in 1988. On March 24th of 2016, a hammer matching the description of the one Smart had claimed to have lost was discovered in a local pond and taken into evidence by the Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. Plumas County Sheriff Hagwood, who was 16 years old at the time of the murders and knew the Sharp family, stated, "The location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced." Gamberg also stated at that time 6 potential suspects were being examined. In April of 2018, Gamberg stated that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. However, there have been no further developments in this homicide case, and it does remain unsolved to this day. And we will continue on to the disappearance of Brandon. Swanson. Shortly after midnight on May 14th of 2008, Brandon Swanson of Marshall, Minnesota, drove his car into a ditch on his way home from celebrating the end of the spring semester with fellow students from Minnesota West Community and Technical College's Canby campus. Uninjured, he got out and called his parents on his cell phone. Unsure of his exact location, he told them he believed he was near Lind, and they drove out to pick him up. However, they were unable to locate him. Swanson remained on the phone with them until he went silent 47 minutes later after exclaiming, "Oh shit," and has not been seen or heard from since. In the morning, Swanson's parents reported him missing to police, who advised them to wait as such behavior was not uncommon for young men his age. Later that day, the circumstances of his disappearance became more complicated when his cell phone records showed that he had been near Porter, 25 miles from where Swanson had said he was, in a different direction. That information led to the discovery of his car near Taunton. It is not known whether Swanson was aware of the discrepancy when he talked to his parents. Foul play had not been ruled out, but it has also been proposed that he might have accidentally fallen into the Yellow Medicine River near where his car was found and drowned, although extensive searches have not found a body. Land searches with dogs have continued in the area for several years. His parents successfully lobbied the state legislature to pass Brandon's Law, which requires that police begin investigations of missing adults promptly. A native of Marshall, Lyon County in southwestern Minnesota, Swanson graduated from Marshall High School in 2007. He then chose to study wind turbines for a year at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College campus in Canby. Classes at Minnesota West ended for the academic year on May 13th of 2008. Swanson stayed in Canby for the evening to celebrate with friends. At 2 different parties, he was witnessed drinking alcohol, but his friends said not enough to make him seem visibly intoxicated. Swanson left Canby for the 30-mile drive home before midnight. Just before 2 a.m., he called his parents on his cell phone, telling them that he had driven his Chevy Lumina off the road and into a ditch from which he could not remove the car. He was not hurt, and he asked them to come to where he was and to pick him up. Annette and Brian Swanson got in their pickup truck and drove out to where they thought he was, keeping him on the phone despite occasional hang-ups and drops. Brandon stayed with his car and tried to signal them by flashing his lights on and off, but they saw nothing, nor did he see them do the same. Brandon finally gave up and told them he was leaving the car to walk towards lights he could see that led him to believe that he was near Lind, a small town roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall. He told his father to head for the parking lot of a local bar and wait for him there. Brian began driving there, talking to his son as he did. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes into the call, Brandon's suddenly interrupted himself on the phone and said, "Oh shit." He was silent for the remainder of the call until his parents hung up and made multiple attempts to call him back. Brandon has not been seen or heard from since. At 6:30 a.m., his parents reported Brandon missing to the Lind police. They were told at first that it was hardly unusual for young men that age to stay out all night after the last day of college classes. Annette Swanson specifically recalled that one of the officers said it was Brandon's right to be missing. Later that morning, the Lind police did start a search, but found no trace of Brandon in the town or outside. They requested that the office of Lyon County Sheriff Joel Dahl assist them. To better focus the search, the sheriff's office obtained Brandon's cell phone records, which revealed that Brandon had been calling from the vicinity of Taunton along State Highway 68, the main route to Canby, northwest of Marshall, and 25 miles from Lind. Searching in that area, deputies discovered Brandon's abandoned car in a ditch off a gravel road along the Lincoln County line, a mile north of Highway 68, bringing the office of that county's sheriff, Jack Vizecki, into the investigation as well. He told the media that the Lumina had gotten hung up on the top of an incline at the edge of the road, not seriously enough to damage the car, but enough to keep the wheels from touching the ground on that side. There was nothing else found amiss with the car, and due to the grass and gravel in the area surrounding it, there were no tracks and thus no way to tell what direction Brandon might have started walking. His cell phone call had been routed through a tower at the intersection of County Routes 3 and 10 near Minota, another town along Highway 68. By May 15th, the call had been determined to have come from within 5 miles of the tower. Searchers were concentrating their efforts there. Since part of that circle included Yellow Medicine County to the north, authorities from that jurisdiction also took part. Dahl noted that the area, a red light atop Taunton grain elevator, could be seen. He thought that it was possible that the red light Brandon had seen had led him to believe Lind was within walking distance. Ground searchers were being complemented with a flyover by an aerial team. Search dogs were also brought in from the Twin Cities. A team of bloodhounds from nearby Cottington County, South Dakota, picked up a 3-mile scent trail that largely followed the field roads west-northwest to an abandoned farm, then along the Yellow Medicine River to a point where it appeared to enter the stream. Brandon had mentioned passing fences and hearing nearby water, his father recalled. On the theory that Brandon might have drowned, boats from the state's Department of Natural Resources were deployed along the river, and gates were installed. In some areas in Lincoln County, the water had been 10 feet deep on the morning of the disappearance, but had gone down since then. Deputies also walked the river's banks, and horses and all-terrain vehicles were deployed in the surrounding area. However, Dahl ruled out more organized, extensive ground searches. After the original search found no sign of Swanson, most efforts were discontinued. Sheriff Vizecki continued to walk the 2 miles of the yellow medicine in that area every day for 30 days. The Swansons left their porch light on all night, every night, as a symbol of their hope that Brandon would eventually return or be found, and they still do to this day. Searches resumed late that fall after fields planted shortly after the disappearance had been harvested. Dogs on those searches continued to follow scents of human remains into an area northwest of Porter that had not been searched earlier. Efforts picked up again in the spring after snow melted, but before planting, a cycle that continued through 2011. By that time, 122 square miles had been searched. In 2010, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension took over as lead agency on the case. It set up a tip line. By 2015, 90 leads had been reported that way. By that point, when official searches resumed, the area of interest had moved towards Mud Creek, a tributary of the Yellow Medicine, north and northwest of Porter. While the trail followed by one of the dogs went into the Yellow Medicine River, and despite her son's last known words, Annette Swanson does not think he drowned there. After following the scent to water, that dog continued up across the other side and along that riverbank to another gravel road, where it continued north towards the Yellow Medicine County line and ended. There really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river, she told CNN. Brian Swanson also recalls that any alcohol his son had consumed earlier in the evening, notwithstanding, he did not seem disoriented or confused during their phone conversations. If Swanson is still alive, there are other possibilities, although they appear remote. He could have intentionally disappeared, but his parents do not believe he would have done that. Vizecki said he could not rule out foul play, even though there was no evidence of it. Someone could have been in the shadows, and they got him that way, he speculated. After the searches, Annette Swanson was still struck by the initial response of the Lind police that her son had a right to be missing when she told them how old he was. "I'm his mother, and I knew something was horribly wrong," she recalled later. She and Brian began lobbying for changes in the state law that would require an investigation into the case of a missing adult to begin as soon as it was reported, much as was already required in cases of possibly abducted children. To this day, Brandon Swanson's remains have never been recovered, and he has never been found alive. How do you all feel about unsolved mysteries? I am just as fascinated by those as I am by true crime that is solved. It's amazing to me in this day and age, with our technology and ability to use DNA analysis and all of the other, things that we have at our fingertips to search for people or solve crimes, that there are still investigations that are unsolved with no real leads. I really appreciate everyone that tuned in this evening. I know it's a little different than the true crime we've been doing together, but if you enjoy unsolved mysteries as much as true crime that is solved, leave a note down in the highest compliment you can pay to the channel is a thumbs up or subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one. Sweet dreams.